Great to be chatting with you.
Yes, likewise.
So I want to begin with there's a lot of complicated terminology, proxy voting, discharge petitions. Explain to your friend at home or your aunt exactly what took place yesterday.
Yes. So we, a group of us, are trying to get it so that members of Congress who give birth or their spouses give birth can vote from home, essentially, can take parental leave and still represent their constituents. It's called voting by proxy, but what it really means is for 12 weeks, you don't actually have to be physically present here in the U.S. Capitol, and your vote will still count. And so we try to do that. Normally, the way to get a bill passed in the House is to get 218 votes for it. Unfortunately, Speaker Johnson did not want this to happen. So we had to do what's called a discharge petition, which is a way that if you get 218 signatures on this petition, that leadership has to bring a bill to the floor. 218 is the majority in the House. So if you can get 218 signatures, they have to bring a bill to the floor. Now, Speaker Johnson doesn't like this. We were one of only 5 successful discharge petitions this century and the fastest to ever get to 218. But instead of just bringing up our bill to the floor like he is supposed to do, he tried to be really shady, frankly, and sneak something into the rule for the week of how the House was going to be, what we were going to be doing for the week that says that this discharge petition couldn't happen. And so we got 9 Republicans to vote with all the Democrats to kill the rule. And then instead of working with us to actually put the bill on the floor like he has to do, he just decided to close Congress for the week.
So just translation here, proxy voting. There was proxy voting during COVID, and then there is no longer proxy voting, and you guys are trying to bring that back.
We're trying to bring it back only for 12 weeks after a member of Congress gives birth or their spouse gives birth. So, during COVID, we had proxy voting for anyone, for, anything that was COVID related. This would be a very narrow, narrowly tailored thing. And this matters a lot, in my opinion, because as you might know, Congress is pretty old. And in order to get better policies, we need more different sets of people here in Congress. It can't just be old white men making policies for everyone. And a lot of what I hear from young people is that they don't want to come to Congress because they want to have families. They don't know how they can make the logistics work. And so making sure that people can actually take parental leave and be with their families when their families need them most is a really important way that we can get more young people into office.
What do you make of Johnson's argument and the Republican leadership argument that this is a slippery slope here, that allowing this will mean more and more members aren't coming in, and ultimately Congress is a place where people need to show up?
I wish we were getting to a place where 100 people were giving birth and therefore not coming to Congress. That's not what's happening. 13 people ever have given birth while in Congress, right? So we're talking about a very narrowly tailored approach. Also, Speaker Johnson himself used proxy voting 40 times during the pandemic. And to me, this whole idea of a slippery slope is kind of bullshit, because it is literally our job as legislators to decide where things start and end. That's like saying if we pass any law, we have to pass every law, or if we make any regulation, we have to make all the regulations. No, literally our job as legislators is to deliberate and decide these things. So it's not a slippery slope. We as a body will deliberate and decide what we think makes sense.
As far as what comes next here, when you guys return to session or whenever they decide to return to things, what needs to happen next for this to move forward? And how do you see this playing out?
So we did a motion to discharge, which is just the next step in the process, on Tuesday. And after that, the speaker has 2 legislative days to bring up our bill. Now, we think part of why he closed Congress this week is because he didn't want to have to bring up our bill this week. And so next week, he will have to bring up our bill within 2 legislative days. We understand that he might try the same thing next week that he tried this week and put a provision to kill the discharge petition into the rule for the week, which means we will have to defeat that again. And then he will have no choice but to bring up our bill, and we have the votes to pass it.
Why do you think this is so important to him, opposing this?
I really don't know. I cannot figure out why he cares so much. Like, Republican leadership is throwing everything at this. Like, it's making our victory even sweeter because they care so much. But I don't know. He himself proxy voted 40 times. So a lot of his arguments are moot, right? And you would think that actually, the next person to give birth in Congress is actually a Republican, Kat Kamak, who just announced her pregnancy. So you would think that he would be in support of this since their margin is so small. But I don't know. He's very, very opposed, and I'm not quite sure why. But it is fun to watch him squirm.
Where does she stand on this legislation, by the way?
That's a great question. She has not publicly said.
The larger question I get, from people who are watching this happen online is like, well, I don't have maternity leave at home. Why should these members of Congress get special treatment?
Well, I think everyone should have paid family and medical leave. And the way we're going to do that is get more people into Congress who have taken parental leave and understand the importance of it so that we can vote and give everyone across the country access to paid family leave. Also, there are some parts of our job that are just different from other jobs. For instance, I represent California, which means a part of my job is flying at least 10 hours a week, every week, to go from California to DC and back to California. And there's a point in your pregnancy where you're literally not allowed to fly anymore, let alone how you really don't want to be bringing your like brand new newborn baby on an airplane with all those germs, right? And so there's just some components of this job that make it even harder. But I think everyone should have parental leave.
And I want to get back to the conversation we were having earlier about what difference do you think it would make to have more young people in Congress, more young moms in Congress? What impact do you think that might have on policy?
I think it will have a huge impact. So look, Anna Paulina Luna is our Republican co-lead on this. We don't agree on a lot of things, but there are a lot of things we agree on, in part because we are young women, right? So she cares a lot about increasing access to fertility treatment for service members, for instance. So do I. That's something I'm working a lot on in the Armed Services Committee. We're working together on, beauty products and food safety, right? Just like some things that maybe some of our colleagues don't understand or don't care about because they're older, but that we really do. And so, I'm not saying we agree on everything. There's quite a lot we don't agree on, and there's a lot I think we need to get done that I hope will be bipartisan, but right now is not, like access to affordable universal childcare, increased access to fertility treatment for everybody, all these kinds of things that will make it easier for young parents. But getting more young parents in here on both sides of the aisle is going to make it easier to get those things done.
Well, what else do you think you guys can do legislatively, policy-wise, that both parties can do to encourage more young people? Because more and more, we have a highly engaged audience that are very into the news. But when I ask them, like, okay, are you going to go to Washington? Like, are you going to go run for office? They're like, no, that's not for me. What are things? Are there other things now that you have a few terms under your belt that you think can be done realistically to get good people with good ideas in there who are under the age of 65?
So first of all, I will say I was one of those people. I never thought I'd be running for Congress. This was not in my 5-year plan. And so what I will say to folks is that, like, I know sometimes it seems like this horrible cesspool, and why would you want to put yourself in that position? But actually, it's only going to get better if we get more good people to opt in instead of all of the good people opting out because it seems so horrible. So one, if you're thinking about it, you should really consider it because we need your voice and your creativity and your ingenuity now more than ever. But there's a lot we need to do to make it easier for young people to run for office. Campaign finance reform, some of these things like proxy voting, making it, our schedule in Congress is not very conducive to young families, right? So we could change how we do voting weeks and stuff. It's very in the weeds, but there's a lot we can do to make it easier for young people. I think a big part of that would be campaign finance reform, because often what I hear from young people is that part of why they don't feel like they can run for office because they just don't have access to the kind of fundraising networks they feel like they would need to be successful.
And I understand that you are working on this VF for Military Families Act that would cover infertility diagnosis, treatment, IVF for military families. Where do things stand on that? And, we heard a lot during the campaign trail from both sides, including President Trump, that, he he's referred to himself as the father of IVF. Or where do things stand as far as getting IVF covered? The insurance industry, our committee's working on that. Do you see a bipartisan effort happening there?
So right now, for service members who are covered under the TRICARE insurance, which is all service members, in order to get fertility treatment covered, you have to prove that it was service connected, which is really hard to prove. But 1 in 4 military families report experiencing infertility, and it makes sense, right? We're asking them to go to really dangerous places far away from their partners in their prime reproductive years. I would venture a guess a lot of the chemicals we're exposing them to, a lot of the other things we're asking them to do are pretty bad for fertility.
Even the psychological stuff, the mental component is key there in terms of the stress and various things that they undergo.
Absolutely. And so what we're saying is you shouldn't have to prove service connection. All service members should have IVF covered under TRICARE. And actually, starting this year, members of Congress and our staff have access to IVF being covered under our insurance. And so we're just saying service members should get the same, benefits that members of Congress and our staff are able to get. Right now, we don't have any Republican co-leads, but we are working and talking to Republicans about this. I think it should be a bipartisan issue, right? President Trump has said he wants to expand access to IVF. This is a very easy, concrete way to do it. Last year, we were able to get this provision through the House Armed Services Committee in a bipartisan manner, and actually off of the House floor in a bipartisan manner. It ended up getting killed in the negotiations between the House and the Senate. But I do think that we have a really good chance of getting this done.
And then beyond military families to non-military families, where do things stand there as far as IVF?
So there is a bill to expand fertility treatment to everyone to make it mandatory for insurance coverage. Right now, certain states have that. So again, District of Columbia has it, which is why members of Congress and our staff are able to have access to that. California, where I represent, does have some provisions like that, although they're a bit hard to access and you have to prove infertility. There is a bill to expand access, insurance coverage of all fertility treatments. I'm a co-sponsor of that bill. So far, we haven't had any Republican interest in moving that forward, but I think it's really important. Look, I'm a 36-year-old woman. This is basically what I talk about with my friends all the time.
Right. I mean, I remember a couple of years ago, you very publicly froze your eggs.
Yeah. So we're talking about freezing eggs, who wants to have kids, who doesn't want to have kids. I think access to fertility treatment is a very important part of reproductive freedom, right? Reproductive freedom to me is both choosing not to have a kid, but also having an accessible, affordable way to build a family if you want to. And so we're going to keep pushing, but so far we haven't had any Republicans work with us on it. And Trump hasn't actually done anything on this executive order that he says he wants to increase access to IVF. But listen, I hope that he wants to. I don't trust him for anything really, but listen, if he wants to, we want to.
I think the executive order was about coming back to him with recommendations. I think sometime this month, I think, was the deadline.
Yes, we'll see what recommendations they come back with. We're game. Let's get fertility access for everyone. I hope he is there. I hope he likes our bill and wants to push it forward. That'd be awesome.
So if there's an invitation to the White House to discuss all things IVF, you're there.
On that particular issue, and probably only that particular issue, yes.
Congresswoman, thank you for chatting.
Thanks for having me.